This message comes from Focus Features, presenting Anemone, starring 3-time Academy Award winner Daniel Day-Lewis in his long-awaited return to the big screen. It's the most anticipated performance of the year. Anemone, rated R, only in theaters October 3rd.
Hey, so just in case you don't see the title of this episode, we are going to be talking about the concept and definition of genocide and everything that entails. So take care listening. All right, on to the show. What's good? You are listening to Code Switch. I'm Gene Demby, and today I'm joined by Leah Donnella. She's our senior editor at Code Switch. You've heard her on the podcast like a million times at this point. Leah, what's good with you?
Hey, Gene.
All right, so you're next to me on the mic. I guess I'm turning the steering wheel over to you because I need to mix metaphors. Where are we dropping today, Leah?
Okay, so we're actually flying, not driving, or maybe taking a time machine, because we're going to Kigali in 1998, where President Bill Clinton is addressing the people of Rwanda.
During the 90 days that began on April 6th in 1994, Rwanda experienced the most intensive slaughter in this blood-filled century we are about to leave. Families murdered in their homes, people hunted down as they fled by soldiers and militia, through farmland and woods as if they were animals.
In that speech, President Clinton said he thought it was important to know that the killings that happened were not spontaneous or accidental. They grew from a government policy aimed at the systemic destruction of a people. And it wasn't just the Rwandan government at fault. The entire international community bore responsibility as well.
We did not act quickly enough after the killing began. We should not have allowed the refugee camps to become safe havens for the killers. We did not immediately call these crimes by their rightful name, genocide.
Gene, the United States failed to call what was happening in Rwanda a genocide until it was too late to do anything about it. President Clinton called that one of the failures of his administration. And make no mistake, the U.S. had at the time the knowledge to understand what was happening. So in failing to act, a lot of people argue that our country became complicit in the killing of hundreds of thousands of people. And I think that's all important context as we try to understand what's happening today, 30 years later, in a different part of the world.
There is no clean water, no toilet, all while the bombings never stop.
Daily images of death and widespread destruction in Gaza have triggered global outrage.
The world's leading association of scholars who study genocide has declared that Israel's actions in Gaza meet that legal definition. In a detailed 3-page...
On Tuesday, September 16th, a UN commission released a report saying that Israel has committed genocide against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. That finding comes in the wake of more and more people and groups alleging that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinian people.
Right. Back in 2023, South Africa brought a case to the International Court of Justice accusing Israel of genocide, and more than 24 other countries have supported that allegation.
Some leading Palestinian and Israeli human rights groups have also called Israel's actions genocide. And this summer, the International Association of Genocide Scholars stated that they believe Israel's actions in Gaza meet the legal definition of genocide. That last group, the IAGS, is considered to be one of the most authoritative bodies on genocide in the world.
Right. And we should note that many everyday Palestinians have said that they believe Israel's committing a genocide against them. And of course, Israel says their actions in Gaza are acts of self-defense following Hamas's massacre of Israelis on October 7, 2023. Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and representatives of the Israeli government and military vehemently deny those charges of genocide.
I mean, if we wanted to commit genocide, we wouldn't give 2 million tons of food to the population. And also the reason you see the flattened...
So, Gene, I think this conversation is really important because more than 150 nations have agreed that if something is a genocide, they will do something about it. They will try to prevent it. They will intervene.
You know, the Convention of Genocide was not created to help historians feel confident about their assessments long after genocide has ceased. It was created to compel people to act in the moment to stop it.
That voice you just heard is Mohammed El-Kurd. He's an author whose work grapples deeply with how the world perceives violence that is enacted on Palestinians. He believes that Israel is committing genocide right now, and he's convinced that someday that will be considered obvious.
I have no doubt in my mind then that in some years' time, there will be an absolute consensus, even within Israeli society, even through maybe the American government, that this was a genocide. I have no doubt in my mind that there will be museums and memorials erected in the honor of the Palestinian people.
But Mohammed said he wonders if Palestinians will still be there to see that day.
It's much easier to talk about things when they are in the past tense, but it's much more courageous and much more honorable, and it's much more imperative to address things as they are happening in the present, not when, forests grow on top of our graves.
So today on the show, we're going to hear more from Mohammed and others about what the word genocide means, why it's understood very differently by different people, and what that designation requires of the rest of the world.
All right, Leah, let's get into it.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. Indeed's Sponsored Jobs helps you stand out. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed and get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/codeswitch. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Betterment. Start investing in a better future. Whether it's saving for today or building wealth for tomorrow, Betterment helps people and small businesses put their money to work by automating to make saving simpler, optimizing to make investing smarter, and building innovative technology backed by financial experts. So be invested in yourself. Be invested in your business. Be invested in better with Betterment at Betterment.com. Investing involves risk. Performance not guaranteed.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Boll & Branch. Turn your bed into a sanctuary this fall with their buttery, breathable bedding. Enjoy 15% off your first set of sheets at BOLLandbranch.com with code NPR. Exclusions apply.
So, Jean, I want to be really clear about what we are not doing in this episode.
Okay.
We're not going to be litigating the specific case against Israel or trying to prove or disprove anything here.
Okay.
We'll be hearing some people tell us where they land on the issue, but we're not going to go through the step-by-step of their assessments. What we are going to focus on are the elements of genocide and the stakes of using that terminology.
Yeah, let's get into that. So we're going to start with some history here. So back in the 1940s, a lawyer named Raphael Lemkin, who was a Polish Jew, coined the term genocide. Genos for race or tribe, and side, obviously, for killing. Because Lemkin was trying to give a name to the slaughter of Jews during the Holocaust, and it was Lemkin who came up with this term and was pushing to get it recognized on a broader level by more people.
Right, exactly. So his work helped lead to this international 1948 convention, the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide.
Often called the Genocide Convention, which was part of the Geneva Conventions.
Yep. And that is where we get the UN treaty where the first official legal definition of genocide is written out. The treaty says that any of the following things can constitute genocide: killing members of a group, causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of a group, deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part, imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group, or forcibly transferring children of a group to another group.
Huh. But that's not it, right? There are tons of instances, unfortunately, of people killing members from some group that are not considered genocide.
Yeah, sadly, yes, there are many names for the many different ways groups of people get killed. So the particular element that's needed for something to be considered genocide, as opposed to, say, mass murder or a crime against humanity, is the intent to eliminate a specific group.
Your goal is to destroy the group as a group.
Okay, Leah, whose voice is that?
That is Omer Bartov. He's a professor of genocide and Holocaust studies at Brown University. And he told me that there are lots of different acts that can be considered genocidal, not just killing. He says you can starve people, mutilate them.
To destroy their hospitals, their homes, their water facilities, and so forth, create conditions that would bring about epidemics. You can limit their ability to give birth, to multiply.
He says you can also intentionally destroy a group's identity without doing any physical violence to individuals.
If you take that group and you divide it into subgroups and disperse it around the world, then you've destroyed it as a group. If you destroy its museums, its archives, its universities, its schools, its mosques, what you're doing, you make it impossible for the group, even if it can stay where it lived, to reconstitute itself, to have a collective memory, to have an identity, as well as education and health. So all of those elements are part of what is genocide.
Huh. I mean, we could point to a lot of examples from American history that meet some or all of that criteria, right? Like some of these conditions.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, both Black and Indigenous civil rights groups have alleged that the U.S. was committing genocide against them. So Omer has written a bunch of books about the different elements and methods of genocide. The first one came out in 1996, and the most recent one was in 2023. It was called Genocide, the Holocaust, and Israel-Palestine, First-Person History in Times of Crisis.
Which seems very relevant to this discussion you and I are having right now, Leah. Okay. So he's been thinking about and writing about genocide for 3 decades now.
That's right. But he said before he officially started studying genocide, he was living in its shadow.
I was, born and raised in Israel, and the Holocaust was all around me in a sense. I mean, as a child, I heard during the Eichmann trial, we would sit and listen to the radio, reporting of that every evening.
Das waren die ersten Minuten des Prozesses gegen Adolf Eichmann, der heute Morgen 9 Uhr hier in Jerusalem begann.
Adolf Eichmann, of course, was this very, very high up Nazi official. He was one of the architects of, in planning the final solution, the Holocaust. And Eichmann fled to South America, and they had to find him because he was there in hiding in order to bring him to trial for his crimes.
Yeah, so that kind of stuff was in the background of everyday life. But eventually, Omer's studies brought it into the foreground. He wound up studying German history, which eventually wound up intersecting with Holocaust history, as you might imagine. But it's kind of funny because at the time he was doing his PhD work, he said, that was not considered a hugely important area of history.
The Holocaust was not seen as a major event, apart from for Jews and Germans. You could write a history of World War II without ever mentioning the Holocaust.
That's kind of wild from our vantage point today, because obviously the Holocaust is central to the story that we Americans tell ourselves about World War II, and the U.S.'s involvement in it.
Right? So Omer started trying to fill in some of the big gaps in understanding the Holocaust. And he did that in large part by studying a town in Ukraine called Buchach, his mother's hometown.
And he was in a town where most of the Jews had lived before World War II and where most of them were murdered. She left in the mid-1930s with her immediate family, but the rest of my family disappeared, were all murdered, those who stayed in that town.
Oh, that's hard.
By the way, Jean, I think it's worth mentioning here that a lot of conversations about the word genocide wind up talking about the Holocaust, in part because that is the event that the word genocide was first used to describe.
Yeah, it's kind of like the template for most people, like in their brains. Like, and many people consider it like the paradigmatic genocide.
Right, exactly. But, I've spoken to multiple scholars, including Omer, who said it's important to understand that genocide does not always look and feel exactly like the Holocaust. Mm-hmm. There are elements of different genocides that will overlap, but each event has unique characteristics too.
Okay, so what are some of those things that Omer said, define a genocide?
Well, he said that important elements of genocide are in place before any actual physical violence is carried out.
You can't begin at the end when the killing begins. You have to understand how you get there.
Long before bodies start piling up, he said, societies will either create or capitalize on a culture of animosity toward a certain group.
The first important thing about genocide really is when you or your society or your government, the people that you listen to, start identifying a particular group of other people as, even though they may be your neighbors, there may be people who go to school with you, as different, as having some qualities that mean that eventually they are not as human as you are.
We talk about that a lot on this podcast, right? Like, because you have to create this conceptual space for people to think of those people over there as bad guys, so you can justify dropping bombs on them, right?
Exactly. I mean, of course, that dehumanization doesn't automatically lead to genocide.
Right.
But Omer said it's an important precondition.
You say these people, they're murderers, they're rapists, they are thieves, they conspire under us, they are cockroaches, they are vermin, they are animals.
Yeah, that language sounds very familiar in this moment, not at all distant.
Yes, it does. But yeah, Omer said that at this early stage, everyday people are still doing a lot of caveating in their minds about like who's a good version and who's a bad version of whatever group is at issue.
It's not your friend. Your friend seems to be a perfectly nice person, but generally, that's what they're like.
Yeah, we've definitely done a lot of episodes on this, like the good immigrant, bad immigrant dichotomy, right? Mm-hmm. Right, like you got good black folks versus, the other thing. All right, so, okay. Dehumanization is one of the things. Mm-hmm. What are some of the other preconditions that kind of prime a society for genocide?
Okay, so Omer said there's often the creation of a national identity, like specifically an ethno-national identity, with people who belong and people who don't.
You say, our nation belongs to this place and we belong to that place, but there are other people there. And we have nothing against those people, but they don't belong here. That is our place.
I mean, Leah, this is still troublingly close to home. Oh, my God.
I know, Gene, I know. Historically, Omer said that mindset has justified expansion, where nations feel they are entitled to any territory where their people might live. And it has also justified removal. And no-shock removal tends to be pretty unpopular.
People usually don't like leaving their homes. They don't like leaving their jobs. They don't know where they would go. They sometimes have no other place to go to, and nobody wants to take them in. But you say you have to go, and those people don't go. That is, you try to ethnically cleanse them, but they don't leave. That can and has, in history, often led to genocide.
Omer said with respect to the Holocaust, for a long time, the image people had in their minds was of this industrial killing that's super compartmentalized, where no one is specifically responsible.
There are people who take you off the train, there are people who cut your hair, there are people who push you into a gas chamber, people take the corpses out. It's all divided.
Oh, man, this sounds like an assembly line, like everybody taking bits and pieces of the destruction, and but nobody holding all of it.
Yeah, I mean, and that's definitely an image that was somewhere in my mind, too. Mm. And Omer said it kind of reifies this idea that no individual is culpable for what happens.
Right.
But by looking at Buchach, he said he came to believe that the way genocide unfolds on the local level is actually very intimate. Like, every person is to blame. There are extremes, of course, of behavior at both ends of the spectrum, but no one is uninvolved.
The whole idea of there being bystanders, people just are not involved, doesn't actually exist on that intimate level, because if your neighbors, who may have been your friends, but they're Jewish and you are Polish or Ukrainian, and they're taken out and shot on the street, you may feel sad about it, but then they leave behind their apartment, and they may have a better apartment than yours. And if you don't move into it, somebody else will, some other neighbors. And so you become complicit in the process, even if you don't agree with it, you don't support it, but you profit from it. And so you realize that genocide is a kind of social event where everyone becomes drawn in.
People are drawn in, and Omer said they're also drawn together. Like, the actual act of carrying out genocide does something to people. It creates this sort of perverse solidarity.
We have to make sure that we finish this job, because we know what to expect now. If we don't, we can expect those people that we persecuted and murdered to do the same to us. And in genocide, there's a very interesting and sort of troubling element of victimhood, because most people carrying out genocide perceive themselves as victims, not as perpetrators. So there's a dynamic of self-righteousness in genocide that is very hard for people looking from the outside to understand. They feel that they're actually just protecting themselves, that they're on the right side of history.
Understanding that mentality, Omer said, led him to believe that what happened in Buchach was not this distant, unimaginable thing like you might hope.
And then you understand that it's actually what you could see in your own neighborhood if things changed. So it makes it much less something that happened at another time in another place. It could never happen to us. So you just have to change the conditions a little bit, and you can expect the same kind of behavior by human beings.
This is chilling, Leah.
Yeah. Today, Omer doesn't just believe that genocide could theoretically happen in another time and another place. He's come to what he calls an inescapable conclusion, that genocide is being carried out by his home country, right at this very moment.
To think that now the state of Israel is engaged in genocide is, I think, for many people, for me too, is unthinkable, is scandalous.
Scandalous, he said, because the state of Israel was created, at least by some accounts, as a direct response to genocide.
But what is scandalous is not saying that it is. The scandal is that this is what is happening.
When we come back, we're going to get into the stakes of calling something a genocide.
The refusal to call it a genocide is not rooted in a wrestling with the meaning of the word. It is rooted in the understanding that genocide is a crime that has legal repercussions, and naming it would require the entities and the countries that have signed on to the Geneva Convention to take measurable actions to stop it.
And that's something that's very important to understand in the case of that particular event, is that it can be stopped at any moment.
That's coming up. Stay with us.
This message comes from Focus Features. Don't miss Focus Features Anemone, starring 3-time Academy Award winner Daniel Day-Lewis in his long-awaited return to the big screen. It's the most anticipated performance of the year. Anemone tells the story of two brothers wrestling with their past and the one secret that has kept them apart for decades. Featuring Daniel Day-Lewis, Sean Bean, and Samantha Morton. Anemone, directed by Ronan Day-Lewis. Rated R, under 17, not admitted without parent. Only in theaters October 3rd.
This message comes from Sony Pictures Classics. In Eleanor the Great, June Squibb brings to vivid life the spirited 94-year-old Eleanor Morgenstein, who after a devastating loss tells a tale that spirals beyond her control. From director Scarlett Johansson comes a comically poignant exploration of how the stories we hear become the stories we tell. Deadline puts it, there won't be a dry eye in the house. Eleanor the Great, only in theaters September 26th. Support for NPR and the following message come from Boll & Branch. Turn your bed into a sanctuary this fall with their buttery, breathable bedding. Enjoy 15% off your first set of sheets at BOLL&branch.com with code NPR. Exclusions apply.
Gene.
Leah.
Code Switch. And we are talking about the term genocide. We all know allegations of genocide are weighty and extremely fraught, as we are seeing in the way that people are talking about how to characterize what Israel is doing in Gaza.
Yep. And Gene, I think we should acknowledge here that a lot of people get really frustrated when we spend a lot of time talking about language.
Yep.
You know, you can spend a lifetime figuring out the most precise word to describe something, but like, what does identifying that word actually do?
The refusal to call it a genocide is not rooted in a wrestling with the meaning of the word. It is rooted in the understanding that genocide is a crime that has legal repercussions, and naming it would require the entities and the countries that have signed on to the Geneva Convention to take measurable actions to stop it.
Gene, that's Mohammed El-Kurd. You heard his voice at the very beginning of this episode. Mohammed is Palestinian. He lives in New York now, but he grew up in Jerusalem.
My house was taken, like many houses in Jerusalem and Palestine, was taken by settler organizations that are registered as tax-exempt charities in the United States. We were kicked out of our house. It was in kind of a microcosm of the larger Palestinian condition because my grandmother has been kicked out of her house in Haifa. And we have lived our lives in not only dispossession, but kind of justifying ourselves in why we deserve dignity and human rights and not to be dispossessed.
Mohammed is a journalist. He was the first ever Palestine correspondent for The Nation. He's an organizer. He helped organize the movement to save Sheikh Jarrah, a neighborhood in East Jerusalem. He's a poet, and he's the author of a book called Perfect Victims. And that book gets really deep into the question of which communities and individuals have credibility in the public eye. He argues that Palestinians have to adhere to very specific roles.
In order to be heard, in order to be able to speak, in order to be even mournable and grievable.
Mohammed talks a lot about language and why discussions about words can be both really frustrating and really important.
The conversation around language is really a conversation about power, because those who get to dictate the terms of engagement are those in power. You know, it's the oldest cliche in the book, the victors write history.
So what does Mohammed make of these conversations that are happening right now about the word genocide? Is he hopeful about the way that they're unfolding? Is he frustrated with them?
It's really both.
I think what people need to understand is that when they're pontificating on panels and on university halls about whether this is genocide or not, it's not, it's not that we want this to, I would rather this not be a genocide. It's not that I'm eager for it to be a genocide. The reason why I want it to be called a genocide is because when you are diagnosed with a certain disease, you need to name it in order to know how you treat it. But in reality, when I'm thinking about this genocide and when I come to terms with the magnitude of it, I am realizing that I am talking about lovers and friends and families who have been separated from each other. I'm talking about sisters and siblings. I think about the people who have died without getting the opportunity to say sorry to one another or to say to each other that I love you or to have a food that they wanted to eat. We're talking about our people and our neighbors and our friends. I'm talking about my friends' cousins and siblings.
Gene, Mohammed said that the conversation around genocide is connected to a bigger problem we have with language, which is that there can be this huge disconnect between what someone is doing and what they say they're doing.
For every rogue politician, we have politicians who are polite, who know the words, who make sure to do everything in accordance to international law, who say the nice things, and still act and behave in a genocidal manner. And I think this tendency to focus on language over material actions, to focus on sentiment over material actions, over policy-driven, systematized actions, tangible actions, is what brought us here today.
And he says in the U.S., a lot of the conversation is not about those actions.
It is not about how many Palestinians have been killed by Israel. It's about our language. It's about whether From the River to the Sea is anti-Semitic. It's about whether these student movements are bigoted. It's about how we should talk about Palestine. It's about what the word intifada means. We are talking about language and semantics instead of talking about the tangible and the material and the real thing. And again, this is, I think, an attack on the poor. It's an attack on the marginalized classes. It's an attack on the oppressed, on the undereducated, because those who are struggling to put food on their table are not going to have the time to memorize these perfect scripts that will help them escape scrutiny and will help them escape punishment.
Kate Timony is a genocide scholar. She says that the focus on language and the term genocide can make a big difference on a geopolitical scale. And that's not always a good thing.
Genocide is called the crime of crimes. And so because of that term, I think people feel that in order to be heard or in order to be taken seriously, that they then go to this crime of crimes, genocide term, so that the egregiousness or the severity of the situation can be very quickly conveyed. But it is unfortunate because it makes it seem as though there's some kind of hierarchy in these crimes.
Kate is an associate professor and chair of the Department of Religion at Montclair State University in New Jersey. She's also an editor for the journal Genocide Studies and Prevention, and she's a member of the International Association of Genocide Scholars.
The International Association of Genocide Scholars, you mentioned them before, but that's the group that made headlines for saying that they think Israel's actions meet the legal definition of genocide.
Yep.
Okay.
And she walked me through a little bit more of the history of that UN convention to define the word genocide.
Of course, it's a product of its time. So the way in which race was thought of at that time, or the fact that the groups listed are those groups, are all parts of compromises and parts of historical artifacts and parts of prejudices and biases and political interests that the parties had when they were putting it together. So there are fingerprints of that all over it.
One example, there are only 4 protected characteristics listed in that treaty: race, ethnicity, religion, and nationality.
So not gender or political affiliation.
Exactly. So that's a subject of some contention for people.
Huh.
Another problem people have with the treaty definition is that it makes genocide a really difficult crime to prosecute because, again, it requires proof of intent.
It's very, very difficult to actually hold individuals or particular state parties, responsible because the bar is so high.
That is kind of wild because, stay with me for a second, Leah, but we talk about this a lot when we talk about why it's hard to talk about racism and discrimination on a smaller scale, because very few people are going to cop to being racist in intent or discriminatory in intent, right? But there's all sorts of behavior that perpetuates racism, right? With discrimination lawsuits in the United States, they're notoriously hard to win because no one is going to say, I didn't hire this person because they're Latino.
Right. In fact, Kate told me that since the term was invented, there have only been 3 instances in which a government has been tried and found guilty of genocide.
So there's been the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, and there was also one held for Cambodia.
Just coming back to Omar real quick, a lot of his research in the field of genocide studies has gotten at that idea that one of the flaws is that trying to prove intent often relies solely on the perspective of the perpetrators of a genocide, and ignores the perspective of the people who are being victimized.
Yeah, and this obviously means that there are places and cases where lots of folks understand genocide to be happening or to have happened, but where no one has ever been officially convicted of committing a genocide. I'm thinking about Sudan, or the targeted killings of Uyghurs in China, or the indigenous people of Guatemala.
Right.
It's the Genocide Convention that has that particular obligation to actually intervene once you believe a genocide is actually underway. Now, it's supposed to. That doesn't mean it actually happens, right? So we see plenty of situations where on the ground, it seems to be as though people are being killed en masse or otherwise being destroyed, where international actors have stood by.
The United States included, she says.
Right. I mean, at the beginning of this episode, we heard Bill Clinton apologize for doing that exact thing in Rwanda.
Yeah. Rwanda is one of Kate's areas of expertise. She told me she thought that the apology was necessary.
But I think for some, it was too little too late, which is the case that's often the sentiment when there's an apology. It's like, yeah, where were you?
But Kate said that one of the most important lessons we learned, or at least should have learned from Rwanda, is the cost of not intervening. Reminder, in just a few months, hundreds of thousands of people were killed.
So you would have hoped that we would see just how much destruction was wrought by standing by, and then what little we could have done that could have made a huge impact. Unfortunately, we did learn that it is more common, I think, for the international community to stand by than not.
I asked Kate Timoney how she would define Israel's actions in Gaza right now.
I would say that Palestinians as a community are kind of being collectively punished as a civilian community for the acts of Hamas, and things like not allowing humanitarian aid in, things like targeting hospitals, refugee camps. Those things are tantamount to genocide, to trying to eliminate a group, in this case, largely by starvation. There should be an international response. I mean, I think many people have asked for a ceasefire.
Leah, it sounds like Mohammed, Kate, and Omer, who we heard from earlier, are in agreement about what's going on, but there are people who disagree. Have you had a chance to talk to any of them?
Yeah. And I just want to emphasize, we're not here to turn this into a debate about what Israel is doing. But we do want to understand the differences in how some people analyze what's happening. So I spoke to someone named Sarah E. Brown. She has her PhD in comparative genocide studies. She's the director of the San Diego office of the American Jewish Committee. And like Kate, she's a member of the International Association of Genocide Scholars. But unlike Kate, she does not agree with the IAGS's recent statement. In fact, she wrote an op-ed about it called, "In the Rush to Vilify Israel, Genocide Scholars Ignored the Truth."
Oh, that's a headline is doing a lot. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get into that any deeper, can you briefly tell us what this statement, this resolution from the International Association of Genocide Scholars said, what it actually said?
Yeah, of course. It starts out by saying, quote, "Since the horrific Hamas-led attack of 7th October 2023, which itself constitutes international crimes, the government of Israel has engaged in systemic and widespread crimes against humanity, war crimes, and genocide, including indiscriminate and deliberate attacks against the civilians and civilian infrastructure, hospitals, homes, commercial buildings, etc., of Gaza, which, according to official UN estimates at the date of this resolution, has killed more than 59,000 adults and children in Gaza," end quote. By the way, the official death toll just 3 weeks after that resolution came out is now more than 64,000. The resolution then details some more statistics and ends by calling upon Israel to stop all actions that constitute genocide and for all members of the Genocide Convention to live up to their obligations under international law.
Okay, so what were Sarah Brown's concerns with that statement?
Well, she was very critical of the process that the IAGS used to issue that resolution. She told me the topic was never openly discussed. There was no room for scholarly debate. And she also said she had concerns about the validity of some of the information cited in the resolution. And then there was the vote. Almost 90% of people who voted at all voted for the resolution, but only about a third of the eligible members of IAGS actually voted.
When the association decided to release a press release celebrating this resolution, they falsely presented it as 90% or 86% of genocide experts around the globe agree. And that is not the case.
Sarah also told me that she's worried that the resolution will be used as fodder for anti-Semitic violence. She pointed to the murder of 2 staffers at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. last May.
The murderer was looking to harm Zionists, was looking to harm what he thought were Israeli Jews. And so, unfortunately, these murders were prompted by someone who had read vitriolic, horrific statements against Israel and against Jews on social media and had bought those lines. And unfortunately, I think more false headlines, more prejudice, bias, truly unscholarly resolutions like this one that was just passed, forced through by the International Association of Genocide Scholars, could possibly prompt another individual to read it and think that they are acting in solidarity with global social justice aims and use it to harm Jews.
Do you think the statement made by IAGS is in the same category as the kind of like vitriolic anti-Semitic rhetoric that is happening on social media or that kind of thing?
No, I do not. But I do think that it will be misinterpreted and used as fodder by those who would seek to have leverage and excuse to harm Jews, to harm Israelis, to attack Zionists.
Okay, Leah, that would obviously be horrible if it happened. But what does Sarah have to say about the actual content of this resolution? Like, was it just that it could be used in dangerous ways, or did she disagree with the conclusions?
Yeah, she did disagree with the conclusions. She told me she believes that Israel is fighting a war of self-defense, one that was motivated by Hamas's October 7th attacks. And so she thinks Hamas is largely responsible for the devastation of Gaza.
We need to see Hamas surrender and lay down their arms, and we would immediately see a cessation to the war. And so I think that the global focus on Israel and Israel's actions, I understand it is a member of the nation states. It must adhere to the laws that govern warfare. But for us to see a cessation to this war, an end to this war, we would need to see the 48 hostages returned without any exceptions. And we would need to see Hamas, a genocidal terrorist entity that has said if they were able, they would perpetrate October 7th again and again and again.
I asked her what she thought about statements like one the Israeli defense minister made about fighting, quote, human animals.
Proving intent to destroy in whole or in part is a much bigger project than sampling a handful of social media comments. And I also want to point out that when those comments are made, I think that there is appropriate pushback and rejection of those statements. When I am looking to determine intent, it's not really about, again, parsing out a handful of social media comments from fringe members of the government.
Okay, but just to be clear, like the person who used the phrase human animals was not some like rando on X, right? Like it was a very high up member of the Israeli government, a person with the power to make policy decisions. He also made statements, calling for cutting off food and water and electricity to Gaza.
Yeah, that's right. Here's Sarah again.
So I think you have to actually look at the actions on the ground. You have to look at the behavior of the armed forces. As horrific as this war is, as tragic as every single civilian death in Gaza is, we have to be very careful about applying this idea of intent to destroy in whole or in part the Palestinian people.
I spoke to Sarah before the UN Commission issued their newest report, the report that says Israel has committed genocide against Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. That report addresses the idea of intent directly. It says, quote, explicit statements by Israeli civilian and military authorities and the pattern of conduct of the Israeli security forces indicate that the genocidal acts were committed with intent to destroy, in whole or in part, Palestinians in the Gaza Strip as a group, end quote. I want to end with something that the author Mohammed El-Kurd said. that I think is really important to hear, and it connects a lot of ideas that our other guests have brought up. Mohammed said that it's not lost on him that Israelis, the people right now being accused of perpetrating genocide, have also themselves been victims of genocide. And he says that he is haunted by the idea that this could become a perpetual cycle, driven by each generation and each people's belief that their story is exceptional.
When this all ends, and when this is said and done and it's in the past tense, inshallah, I hope it happens soon, I have a deep worry, I have dread that once we survive this, we might even fall into the trap of exceptionalizing our own suffering and saying that no one else on earth or in history has endured what we have endured. And then that kind of exceptionalism and that kind of perpetual victimhood will then allow us and permit us a perpetual warrior stance that will enable us to oppress others. Learning a flattened history will create a flattened future.
And that is our show. You can follow us on Instagram at NPR Code Switch. If email's more your thing, ours is codeswitch@npr.org. We want to hear from you. You should subscribe to the podcast on the NPR app or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can also subscribe to the Code Switch newsletter by going to npr.org/Code Switch newsletter.
And just a reminder that signing up for Code Switch Plus is a great way to support our show and public media, and you'll get to listen to every episode sponsor-free. So please go find out more at plus.npr.org/codeswitch.
This episode you're listening to was produced by Xavier Lopez. It was edited by Dalia Mortada. Our engineer was Jimmy Keeley.
And a big shout out to the rest of the Code Switch team, Christina Kalla, Jess Kung, Marilyn Williams, and B.A. Parker.
As for me, I'm Gene Demby.
And I'm Leah Donnella.
Be easy, yo.
This message comes from Schwab. At Schwab, how you invest is your choice, not theirs. That's why when it comes to managing your wealth, Schwab gives you more choices. You can invest and trade on your own. Plus, get advice and more comprehensive wealth solutions to help meet your unique needs. With award-winning service, low costs, and transparent advice, you can manage your wealth your way at Schwab. Visit schwab.com to learn more.
Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Online. Is your child asking questions on their homework you don't feel equipped to answer? IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid, no matter the age or personality. One subscription gets you everything. One site for all the kids in your home, pre-K to 12th grade. Make an impact on your child's learning. Get IXL now. And NPR listeners can get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when they sign up today at IXL.com/NPR.
This message comes from Ethos. Discover the modern way to get life insurance all online. Protect your family's future against the unexpected in minutes, not months. With Ethos, you could get up to $3 million in coverage without a medical exam. Just answer a few health questions. Some policies are as low as $2 a day, billed monthly. Get your free quote at ethos.com/NPR. That's ethos.com/NPR. Application times may vary. Rates may vary.